Okay, it's 3 o'clock. I want to get the meeting underway. Calling the March meeting of the Sutton County Zoning Board of Appeals to order. First order of business, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. We received the proposed minutes of the February meeting, and members of the board have had an opportunity to review it. I will entertain a motion to accept those minutes.
I'll make
So
a
move.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the February minutes are adopted. I'm going to change the order of business a little bit. We're going to take the two new business items first, and then reserve the old business for a bit of discussion before we render a decision. So for the first item on the agenda now is that of 453 Hedges Lane LLC for the property at that address, application number 2 of 2025. Wayne, how are you?
Yeah.
Nice to see
you. Thank you for asking. Hope you're all doing well.
And the record can show that I have the affidavit of mailing.
The notice is submitted for the record. Good afternoon, Wayne Bruin of Shea Moore Simpson and Bruin on behalf of the applicant, 453 Hedges Lane LLC. I'm here with Brian Glasser, who is also the architect and record of the process.
Is it the original or different? Oh, the paper, and one is in date. It's the same, okay.
Okay.
So the subject property, before I get into what the roof is, it is a little over 3 acre parcel on the south side of Hedges Lane, with 3 Hedges Lane. The property was part of a minor subdivision granted by the Southampton Town Planning Board in 1984, where they separated this lot from the surrounding property, which was subsequently all the development rights in the lands surrounding this, which were the former parcel associated with the minor, was all preserved farmland. It's currently the preserved farmland, and abutting this is all currently owned by the Peconic Land Trust. Subject property has been improved for a number of years. There are certificates of occupancy for pre-existing structures, primarily a single family dwelling, a 2 and a 1.5 story roof line house, 2 detached barns, 1 detached 1-car garage, 2 detached sheds, and a water tower. And that was all recognized by the town in 1991 by a pre-existing CO. Later, a swimming pool was added in 1995. The dwelling was renovated with additions in 1995 as well. And then there were additions and renovations to the barn in 1997. We provided you with copies of all those structures and the barns and farm buildings were all associated with the adjoining farmland. When it was subdivided and subsequently divided out, the buildings no longer were used in conjunction with that farming. In fact, just to the east of this parcel is a barn and a silo that was used for that farming activities. The premises, this single family dwelling has, the property is not in the village's historic district. However, it is recognized on the inventory of selected historic structures which are outside the historic district, which was prepared by the village in 2017. There was a mention of the barns also possibly being contributing structures. This property, like several other parcels and similar applications that I've presented to this board in the past couple of years, is improved in a certain manner that exceeds the current floor area requirements of the village, particularly as it relates to the accessory structures. We provided several numbers, but the allowable floor area for the dwelling here is 8,322 square feet. And the maximum for any accessory structures would be 1,248 square feet, and for all buildings, 9,570. The existing dwelling has 3,329 square feet. The total floor area of the roof accessory structures is 7,176, which exceeds the allowable floor area by 5,928 square feet currently, and the total floor area is 10,505, which exceeds the allowable floor area by 935 square feet. What we are asking for is the applicant is seeking to do modifications to the existing dwelling and do it in addition so that he can benefit from the maximum floor area that would be allowed for a dwelling on this property. However, and Brian can speak to the plans and we can review those with you specifically, but the balancing here is the fact that the existing house has historic significance to the village. That being said, we had Zach Studenroth do a review with his following up. He did it for the prior owner as well as an updated report for the current owner. What he recognized immediately, there was 2 additions, by the way, that this survey is not.
Well, that's the next application.
My apologies. I thought I had this one.
So the existing dwelling, actually, there were 2 additions on the east side of the existing dwelling and the southerly side that were more modern and not part of the original historic structure. And so the plan is for the applicant to remove those and restore the dwelling to its original historic integrity. They plan after the removal of the southerly addition to add a small shed type entry addition to the rear of that building for access. That being said, you have to make a decision on the alternatives here, and one alternative, the floor area was to do an addition, immediate addition to the dwelling. After discussions with the building inspector and the architect, we decided that that would not be keeping with the historic integrity of the building, and that we should consider alternatives, other alternatives, which would separate any addition or would require us to come to the board for permission to have 2 dwellings on the lot. When I was engaged, I advised the applicant that seeking the variance for 2 dwellings on the lot would be a much heavier task, unless this board tells me otherwise, than doing an addition to the existing dwelling. In particular, if you remember, the Ozersky application, the board considered about a year ago, where we did do an addition to an existing dwelling. And there it worked. The addition worked with that existing dwelling. And one of the things we did while we were in the process, we went to the architectural review board to make sure the addition was consistent. But more importantly, we had the issue of what to do with the former farm outbuildings and the floor area that was related to that. And that's the similar issue that we have here. So one of the things that we determined that the addition, that similar type addition wouldn't work on this particular property. So Brian was able to meet with the building inspector and determine that one way it could be achieved, which has been accepted by the village in the past, is to do an addition that's separated but connected by heated conditioned space, in this case by an underground the underground space, hallway or tunnel, whatever you want to call it, that connects the two spaces, so that it's all treated as the principal dwelling. So we undertook that task, but my recommendation was, because of the historic questions on the existing dwelling and these two existing additions that were there, was to go to the Architectural Review Board and get their input on a preliminary basis. So we did that maybe more than 6-8 months ago, and we spent about 4 meetings trying to get input and on the plans. In fact, the ARB asked us to go through a number of alternatives, not unlike what this board would do. And finally, in December, I asked, and I hope you've had the opportunity to see the minutes from the Architectural Review Board, where the alternative which we'll present to you today was one that the Architectural Review Board thought if you found something they could. They said, of course, they did not commit, was not a final application, but they were above the various alternatives. We started with an alternative which was putting the addition behind the existing well. And the board thought that this addition, which is a barn-like structure, and Brian will walk you through that a little bit, should be separated from the existing dwelling, as just almost have the look of separate buildings, separate dwellings almost, in that concept, even though the building was to be a barn-like structure. The other element, we asked the ARB specifically about the additions. They were comfortable, given that the 2 additions to the existing dwelling were modern. They had concrete block foundations and that they had no objection to our proposal to remove those and restore the existing dwelling to its original historic state. The second element was the layout and design of new buildings, but more importantly, was there any structures, any of the accessory structures on the property that should remain? We were under the impression that the main barn had some historic integrity, and we wanted, because keeping any of the accessory structures put us in a position that the GFA would be exceeded. So our first alternative was to remove all the structures, but we were given a direction that we should maintain that barn, but for that barn, we wouldn't need the GFA variances, and we'll go through the numbers on that. The barn itself, like I indicated on the COs, had additions and modifications to it. In fact, had 2 additions which are more modern. And so our proposal, again, similar to the dwelling, is to remove the 2 additions. And we originally attempted to keep the barn somewhat in the position where it presently is. Ultimately, the ARB recommended that we move our addition further to the east to create further separation on the property, and relocate the existing barn more to the south or the rear of the existing dwelling, so that that barn and the dwelling would have some relationship or connection remaining, and the new structure would be further to the east. So what we're here today is for a variance to maintain the barn, and because of the barn, we would exceed the overall GFA on the property. The dwelling, the addition to the dwelling complies with setback, it complies with GFA, it complies with lot coverage. All the structures comply. We did ask technical variance because the underground connection, the existing dwelling doesn't meet the current front yard setback. So we did ask for, and that's been noticed with that we're doing in addition to an existing dwelling. You won't see it because it's underground. The new addition, the above ground portion, the barn and a barn like dwelling addition is, I believe, approximately 113 feet off the street or 80 feet. So it's even further back than it needs to be. That being said, all the other structures, everything else we propose, all meets lot coverage, all meets setbacks, all other requirements. The only other thing that was mentioned by the building inspector was parking spaces. And there are existing parking spaces associated with the existing dwelling that are in the front yard. When you look at the survey or you look at the aerial photograph of the current situation, we are maintaining those, but we are sort of redesigning them and relocating them a little bit further away from the street. But so that was the other variance that was about maintaining or modifying those existing parking spaces, which are ordinarily not allowed to be in the required front yard. So I don't know if you can see those just to the west of the. I would ask if board, if you have any questions to me right now, I can hopefully answer them, but I'll let Brian sort of take you through the project.
What year is the house?
The house, I don't have, but it might be in the historical reports, but it goes back to the 1800s.
1930 or 1932, we saw both numbers in there.
And how old's the barn?
The farm, we believe, and so the historic reports don't get into that, but they do say that they are contributing. Our knowledge was that the barn was moved from Connecticut to the property.
You don't know what that is?
No.
Is that both barns or, because there are two barns?
Just the one barn, I mean.
So the barn that's further south, what's that's the one that's 70 by 15. That one you're gonna get rid of.
Correct.
And is there any historic significance? What's the history of that barn?
This barn?
This barn.
This barn.
This is the one you're gonna keep and you're gonna get rid of these.
We have
these-
nothing in the reports that talk about any historic significance of that.
Okay.
So, but this is, if you want to see the description of the
Yeah.
historic reports.
Wayne, you mentioned at the beginning that this parcel is slightly over 3 acres.
Correct.
It was referred to as like 2.77 elsewhere in the application, and the survey shows it as 120,000 square feet.
Right, understanding is,
So
it's the minimum size in the R 120.
but it's less than 3 acres, so that impact the
I use that commonly as 3 acres on
Yeah, I mean,
R 120. So that's. I
colloquially
was-
speaking, the only reason I'm asking is to the extent that does it affect the GFA available for the site?
No, the GFA is based on the calculation of 120.
Okay, so it's not based on 3 acres.
No,
it's
no,
on a
it's based
survey,
on.
it's on a survey.
Yeah,
Okay, all right, fine, that was the question I had there.
all the numbers and everything, lot coverage, everything is based on the 120,000 that exists.
Just my minor question. So. Mainly because we have another application. Isn't the mandatory setback for tennis courts 45 feet?
Unless it's sunken. I mean, if it's sunken, it's a 30-foot setback.
Okay.
If it's grade level,
Got
it's
it.
45.
Correct, and this is just something.
Yeah.
Basement on the main house? What's there?
Well, maybe Brian can.
Are they gonna renovate all that?
Brian Glasser, architect. I don't know if you have the full set of drawings, but the current basement is basically an unfinished mechanical room. We would be maintaining that as it currently stands. The current stone foundation would be maintained. There is a stairwell that, when I spoke to John Woodsma about, there is a stairwell within the back area that gets us to, it is a finished space underneath the If you look, it's a smaller kitchenette area, that's gonna be a finished space, which is gonna connect us to the tunnel. And it had to be evenly cooled from both sides of the structures to meet the requirements of like a tunnel connecting two structures.
And the old house, what's that gonna be used for?
The old house is a guest house for a family member.
And the main house?
The main house is for his personal use.
And how many bedrooms in the old house and the new house?
So the main, the existing historic house has, I believe it was, let's double check, I believe it was 2 bedrooms upstairs. Yeah, 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 downstairs, so 3 bedrooms total on the existing. If you were to look, the Greek Revival is the white little, basically that box is three bedrooms. And then the other house is gonna end up being, on all 3 floors, would end up being 7 bedrooms.
And the
So it's
kit,
3 floors, you're not allowed to have 3 floors,
No, in a basement, I'm sorry.
2 floors in the basement.
Yeah.
Okay.
the kitchen in the original historic structure is being removed. That's in the rear extension.
It's a kitchenette area,
Yeah.
which that little kitchenette area, Zach Studenroth, the historical preservation consultant, he said because we needed a transition space to get from one structure to the other, that was where we'd be doing, basically, we're removing the back half of the house, in addition from the back of the Greek Revival. We'd be cutting it clean off and doing a shed roof, and he went through typically with these homes, if an addition was done, these houses never had kitchens. So typically they would do a clean little shed roof, and that's kind of the concept we went with to give us the connecting tunnel and a little kitchenette area.
So the existing kitchen on the ground floor is in the rear extension, which is going to be removed, so there won't be a kitchen.
There won't be a kitchen, no.
And I guess the historic report said that there might have been a kitchen underneath in the basement. There are no remnants of that kitchen. Because, okay, so there won't be a kitchen in the front structure.
No.
It's, in a way, it's a little bit of a shame. I kind of like the rear extension on that house. It's kind of an attractive addition visually from the sides as you approach, but I understand your desire to maximize the available GFA in the new house.
Yes, and one other thing I'd like to add, all of the ARB board members, we took a walk through the entire property. They did go in the house. Zach kind of went through the historical, properties of the house, the structures that we're keeping, and the houses that, there's a back staircase. It doesn't meet code, extremely high risers, the floors are settling. I don't know if it was because of the chimney. There's a lot of factors to that addition that weren't that great for a client, someone to live in.
No, I understand. And actually, from an historic point of view, it may be more accurate to remove it. From an aesthetic point of view, I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
I had similar feelings about the barn that you're preserving. The wings on the barn actually contribute to it aesthetically, in my view. But it may be antithetical to the historical nature of it. The other thing was there were wide plank floors in the extension, the rear portion of the front house, that looked like it was fairly historic or old. So it's not a recent addition to the house.
There was a block foundation, which if Zach was here, we'd go to get, and the
Yeah.
report might break that kind of stuff down. I will say the barn, which you see right there in that image, the additions, there is a living quarters that's currently there. So by removing that, that's something that I believe John went there and seen that. I don't know if it would be considered, was it illegally built or was it?
No, it's built with a permit on the town of Southampton, and it did not have a stove or an oven, it did have a refrigerator, it was sort of an artist studio accessory to the barn for parties
No
and
cooking
stuff like
facility.
that.
No, right. So there was when we went and looked at it, there was beds there. So if you look at those additions, they were 2x4 framing, current, modern addition.
All right, well, I'm not suggesting that we're gonna redo your extensive architectural review board hearings that took 4 meetings and was bouncing you around somewhat, but just out of curiosity. I noticed there that there's a dumpster in the driveway and the flooring in the front portion of that structure is all gone.
They
There's
had
been,
they had a leak.
oh, is that what it was?
A pipe broke
Uh,
and froze. I probably have pictures of what ended up happening. I couldn't.
so the interior is no longer historic.
Well, no, it wasn't. I don't think it was damaged that bad. I know they did have an engineer go there to see what's going on with that. But someone called the village, I guess, and said that they saw like a leak out there and they sent someone out there to take care of it.
The 7-foot icicle from the second floor.
Wow.
What was the engineer's report on the old structure?
I don't know, I think that just was brought to my attention, I can get that.
Is the house sound or is it worth keeping?
All I know is as a licensed professional, the floor joists were definitely a little, I didn't see it actually after the flood issue, but the floor joists were definitely, there was termite damage, they did sister up, I have all this documented. If you look at my drawings, I went there before any of this happened and field measured the entire property, I know, all the aspects of what is currently built there, I have it documented. So, and it's in my, I don't know if you guys have the full packet, it was quite a few pages, like, did they see the whole existing aesthetic drawing?
No.
Probably not, this is what they got.
I don't know if you guys care to look at it, but I was hired originally to document. So the. Oh, no. Actually, no, this isn't the existing, this is proposed, the existing. This is all interesting, I can show you the proposal.
I want to,
We have proposed, here's existing floor plans for subdivision.
Yeah, no, that's the proposed work, I do have
Oh, this says existing.
we did a compare.
that's what this is.
Floor plans, no, it's just the floor proposal. Well, no, I actually have existing drawings for
Okay.
the entire project. I don't know if they're gonna be on here, but
This looks like an existing house to me.
yeah, this is the we're not touching anything, that's something the ARB, like, this is the front, the back, you can see it's much smaller, and if you look here, these are the existing product. So this is the actual meeting, let me show you the elevations, because that part gets kind of interesting, so you can see. So this is the historic house, here's the front, here's the addition to the east, and the addition to the south. So I actually went there and measured for several days with my employees, we measured all the spaces and documented things. And it's not just for this structure. We also measured, so this is the barn, the main barn. So here's the main section we're keeping. This was a new foundation that the house was placed on. Here's the floor plan,
So
so
you say barn,
This is the barn.
you talked about the barn, now you're talking about the house.
yeah, this is the barn, yep. So this is the barn with the two front doors. This is the wing to the east, this is the current wing to the west.
So that's existing already.
This is how it currently exists, so when you come in this door here, this is where they had two beds here, but they have like a little kitchenette space here and then a bathroom and a closet. This is a staircase up to a loft, which is like a little art studio. This is the pictures I just shared with you on the inside showing the beam work, the rough cut timbers, and then I do have pictures of every space, but you'll see here, there's 2x4 walls, sheetrock, it's a different type of construction. So then here's the walk upstairs, there's a bathroom up there. And also, I mean, just to get with it, when it comes to the technical part of the square footages, we have to count any space over, so it's a 1,720 square foot footprint. But because we're over 15 feet, we have to count it twice. So when you see the variance number for the accessory structure, it seems like a lot more, but the concept is that we're basically keeping that element there. So this is that barn, and then I also measured the barn in the back, which I have pictures inside of here. This they think was like maybe a chicken coop area. And this is just, it's all current day construction. There's no historical significance.
In the second barn.
Yeah, the second barn,
further
right.
southernmost barn.
Yep, and I will say, Sally Spanberg also had a report that Zach Suzanoff reviewed. And there was no document of any of these being some type of historical significance. So he was running with that, which he was like, he thought there was more value to that center, to that main barn that we're keeping, and that's where my client, we ended up keeping that house. One thing I'll also mention, so this was like the picture of barn. It's on here, stuff that the moons were, and then here's, I don't know if you guys care to see this.
We have that.
Yeah. Well, yes, I do have everything documented of what was trying to be. If you care to see this.
We have it.
Yeah.
Well, clearly, the purpose here is to And we did this, as Wayne had mentioned, down in Sag, Maine, very similar application with a main dwelling,
You,
which is
you know
not.
what makes it not similar? It is the distance between the dwellings. So the question I keep coming back to, if you're not supposed to have two dwellings on one parcel, why do we arrive at a concept that looks just like two dwellings on one parcel?
Legally with the tunnel.
So there's the spirit of the law, the letter of the law.
Yeah,
I
well.
hate these tunnels.
And there's no kitchen in the other.
I understand that, but I'm saying it looks like if the reason we have a prohibition against having, what is, I guess my question to you would be, or to whomever, is like, what's the prohibition against two dwellings on one property, since
Yeah.
we kind of need two
Yeah.
dwellings on many properties?
Well, I was just gonna say that the older farmhouses are not really suitable for modern living. They're inadequate
Right.
space, we understand that.
Right,
And the accessory structures use up a great deal of the available FAR.
understood.
In an effort to try and preserve that rural agricultural atmosphere and preserve the accessory structures. Some concessions are being made to allow an increase in the FAR on the primary dwelling. In the case down on Sag, Maine, it was well situated to have the addition right behind the front structure. It's almost not visible from the street. It provided the adequate residence. In this case, and I know they went through this with the architecture review board, moving things in the proximity of the barns. But the objective here, in order to still preserve the distinction of the historical house, the new structure was moved about as far to the east, I think, as you could, which enabled it to have separation. But wait, no, but the point that you asked about was, why are we allowing two dwellings on a single lot?
The appearance of two
The
dwellings.
appearance of it, but the number one, the effort was made to make it appear like it's two separate lots. From a technical point of view, to make it two dwellings on a single lot would have required it to be an use variance.
I understand, I understand,
Just wanna qualify that.
I understand
It's
what
the
you
A
guys
or B.
are trying to do here, but what I think I'm questioning is the practice, not the way you guys are trying to sort of work this situation, but the overall practice of this is like, makes me scratch my head, because to me, looks like we have two dwellings on one property,
that's what I'm
and then I think the question I'd also have is, before this, and I know you can't undo the fact that the Architectural and Historic Review Board, but clearly your clients looked at this parcel, they had a vision of how this would be. And if they hadn't stubbed their toe on all this historic stuff, how would they have developed the property? Would they have just knocked it all down? Or would they have taken advantage of the historic features on the property? That's,
I think the first approach.
They would have knocked it-
Before we were involved is they would have demolished everything and started new, which is what happens in the village otherwise.
Mhm.
I think once they realize that the historic structure, then all these other elements, like I said, doing additions directly attached to, but just to show you this is.
But they knew it was historic when they bought it.
The biggest thing was,
I wasn't.
No.
yeah, they did, and the biggest thing is that we originally were gonna put the structure closer, and the major pushback from the ARB.
Yeah, no, I.
Yeah, they were-
That's.
They wanted to feel like.
I pity you.
Yeah, everything you were saying is what they were like,
Yeah,
you wanted to
no,
feel
that
separate.
was to your point. If you're trying to combine a new structure with an historic structure, you sort of got two options. One is to situate it close, and then to either make it look very similar or to make it look very distinct, to separate. The other way to handle the matter is to separate the structures, so it looks like they're two
Kind of
separate
like
There
properties.
was sort of, I was at one of the architectural review board meetings, and at that point, you had a proposal where the the existing house was, of course, where it is. The barn was more or less gonna be where it is today. And the new house was gonna sort of be behind the two of them. And so again, it's an architectural or a landscaping choice. Not that it's relevant to anything. I liked the mix where it looked like a campus rather, what it really looks like now is two separate properties that happen not to have a fence between them. You know, because they're totally two separate eras, visually, there's a lot of space between them. And there was that prior model where they were overlapping, so it clearly looked like one property with different, you know, eras reflected in the construction.
So you nailed it. I mean, it's the plan that you see, you can see the addition was immediately to the south and it was through 4 meetings. And then, as you said, at some point we presented like 5 or 6
Yeah.
alternatives.
And it was a
Was
it was a judgment, it was the taste of the architectural review board.
Yeah,
was
no,
to
that
say-
would work.
Yeah, this
So that's what we're.
this is what was preferred, where the
That's,
barn was off in the front by
Yeah.
itself. And then this was connecting to the historic, and we were putting this up front. We
And you
kept-
had a much shorter time.
yeah. but-
Yeah, we kept pushing
but
it
to
back,
me,
we're like, it's
that's-
not enough, and
Yeah.
and then we're like, all right, we gotta give 5 options, and we gave them 5 different locations to move it around.
Yeah.
And then what you see now.
That proposal turns the little house in the front into a little Potemkin house.
No, I don't know about that.
Well, at least it appeared that way to me now. We have a number of examples of preserving historic structures within the village, some more successful than others.
Well, the like the further south on or west on Hedges Lane, I don't remember the machinations, but I don't believe it has a tunnel, but the little cottage that Michael Davis moved. Right?
Yeah, that was on Hedges. Oh, no, yes. it's on
Yeah.
And I
Hedges.
think they had a
Right.
right to 2 dwellings on that property, so they were able to. do
So there was something slightly different there, but
Yeah.
that was like, that's whatever, it's sort of a little bit similar, which is you have this older cottage. I'm not really interested in the aesthetics in it, I'm more interested in like this
Well,
strange problem that
We
keeps
have
going
the one
around.
on the corner
historic
of
structures.
Sag Road and Sag
Yeah.
King, right opposite the schoolhouse.
Yeah,
Which I think is pretty successful. It looks like 2 separate.
Much smaller, but it's different, it's a much smaller
Yeah, I
property.
understand, but what I'm saying is you say the historic structure.
Right.
One,
Here's several different properties that have shown,
Yeah.
this is what's presented to the ARB, I remember seeing you at the first one.
Yeah.
And then we were going back and forth, these are several different locations showing this is way too close. Yeah, I don't know, I mean, you
Yeah.
all right, well, we may be overlapping too much in our discussion with
this is
architectural
just-
historic
Yeah.
review board as opposed to the CBA, where we're talking about the GFA. And the primary issue here is the need for additional GFA is driven by the desire to preserve historic structure. The configuration is more in the bailiwick of the historic review board. Not that these comments are not relevant, and they may be instructive since you're going back to the AHRB anyway for a final application. But the point here is, to justify the additional GFA, it is conditioned upon preserving the historic structure, keeping it visible to the public and not screened appropriately. The allocation, as I said before, while it might have been more successful preservation of historic structure if the rearward extension stayed on it, not the one to the east, which was kind of awkward and asymmetric. But the one to the south actually looked like it did fit in with that structure. But that would have taken away GFA from your main dwelling or necessitated shrinking the barn, and the barn has its own configuration. So I understand why the configuration comes out the way it is. And of course, the principal structure of the old house there will remain where it is and with that appearance.
And just to summarize, what you also acknowledged is that but for us keeping that barn, if we were able to remove that, we wouldn't need any GFA relief at all.
Or, yeah,
So
or removing the white house in the front, keep the barn, and you wouldn't need GFA. It's the preservation of the historic atmosphere of the farm structure that drives the need for the extra GFA. And by the way, the main house that they're building there is not, in terms of Sagaponic houses, it's not excessive. That main principal dwelling now, including the tunnel in the front, is somewhat standard size house, I think, in the village.
I think you would, if we were able to reboot the front house, all that floor area, we're then able to incorporate it into that house. We have had something that we are guessing is somewhat larger, so you do have that, as you said, more scale.
One other thing, to Marilee's point about the tunnel. I also think that to some extent, the tunnel it's a fiction. I mean, it's, I don't know if they'll ever even use it. Unfortunately, in order to comply with code requirements of a single dwelling on a single lot, it's a necessity. If the code were to change, then it might not be needed. But the alternative of not having the tunnel would necessitate a use variance, which is an entirely different animal from the area variance. And I think it justifies for technical reasons the existence of the tunnel rather than going. I agree with your decision to go this way. Yeah, okay, you want to say something?
Sure, I just wanted to mention the current, let's just call it addition, the new house, the main house
Yeah.
is roughly 6,666 square
Yeah.
feet.
That's lots.
No,
So just so to put it in perspective, if you had a piece of property at 2.77 acres somewhere, we could build an 8,320 square foot home. So with that being said, with the ARB, their goal and our goal from the beginning was always to have these little pieces kind of sporadically placed on the property. So you don't have, and that's why the original presentation, they felt that it was just making the house feel too massive as an 8,000 altogether as one. So by doing this, that was a sacrifice my client was willing to make with the tunnel, and that's where we were going back and forth. It wasn't just like, oh, build a tunnel. It was just like, this is kind of where we got put in, the place we got put into.
The front house will be more or less a guest house.
Right, with the two parking
And
stalls.
unless the weather is foul, they probably won't use the tunnel, they'll walk across the lawn from that.
I was thinking grandchildren, like in the middle, like for Thanksgiving, running through there. I think it would be fun.
It
Like,
could
I think
be
it'd
fun.
great, you know?
By the way, can you skylight that tunnel?
Yeah, no.
All right, okay. Anybody else have any other questions for them? No comments, anyone in the audience have any questions? Application, there have been no letters for or against this in the record from any neighbors or anything, okay. Unless you think that there would be more information that you would like to hear that we haven't heard today, I'll entertain a motion to close the hearing. Anybody?
I have
Or
one-
you have-
I mean, the Conic Land Trust, I assume, is aware of this?
They were given notice.
Just given notice and they haven't, you haven't heard from them, and we haven't heard from them, okay.
And then getting back to the engineer's report. I mean, here you have a building, it's supposed to be historic in nature. But to me, I don't think it's a pleasant historic viewing site. Front is okay. Add-ons aren't so pleasing to what I think would be a historic.
Which
Building.
areas are we talking? The new
Just-
addition to the dwelling?
No, the original dwelling.
Yeah, they're
Oh,
being
the
removed,
original dwelling.
Yeah,
they're being removed.
and then be interesting to see what the engineer thought of the building that's there. You might have to be doing
Yeah,
a complete renovation there.
yeah, Richard, that's a good point. I mean, remember the the Deacon Hedges house? The historic structure that we struggled to preserve, that essentially became almost completely.
So, yeah, so there was termite damage from what I saw, the exposed floor joists in the basement. It's all open, foundation was structurally stable, but the floor joist was something that it's beyond what I'm comfortable doing when it comes to new houses and engineering, that's not an issue, but they do have an engineer right now just because of what happened with the water, but at some point that's gonna be. Right now, speaking to the architecture, the current Greek revival up front, window size, location, placement, and John's gonna end up seeing my drawings, construction documents, hopefully at some point. It's gonna state we're replacing these windows in kind, nothing's changing. Roof pitches, all that kind of stuff is to be maintained.
Well, you know, it's all like, here you got a historic building. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, we'll think about taking it down or putting a new building up, and the new building doesn't look historic, doesn't have the look of the old look, the windows, the same same appeal, you know, it's two different, totally different. It's not Greek, it's, you're calling it Greek.
Yeah, the house up front is considered a Greek revival style architecture.
No, I mean, now you get to the historic value, like what AHRB is saying, it's a historic house, but here you are gonna create another house monstrosity next door. What's the historic value of that house? It doesn't, it's, to me, it's not with the neighborhood of the original existing historic house. So,
That's why they kind
That's
of
kinda
think they
where
made
I'm
it,
at.
but I think that's why they actually make it pretty much looking like two lots. They're like, nobody's building Greek revivals anymore.
but is that the answer? Is that the answer?
That is,
Take it,
unfortunately,
sit
that's the
down.
answer for people, the style of building and the needs of people who are building houses on 2 acres in Sagapana. That is a
Yeah,
need.
but it goes to the saying that you're not very acceptable to what the tunnel and this
Yeah.
creating.
Yeah,
It goes more, my opinion goes to what you're saying, is here we have two separate houses, making it look like two separate lots.
But
I
it
What's the
doesn't,
point of all that?
doesn't have cooking
I don't know.
facilities.
It's on a one lot house, you know?
I know,
So,
and that's why I
to me,
actually,
I'm not.
I don't have
you know,
questions about what they're doing,
Yeah.
I have questions about what we're doing.
well,
The
yeah.
zoning is
But I
doing.
also have questions of what the AHRB is saying to recommend to come to the zoning board to approve a building that it's gonna be built next to, quote, a historic.
We have that all over the village. I'm not happy about it either.
Yeah, but
It
on the
really
same
is all-
lot.
Yeah. To some degree, we do. I'm not saying I love it, but I think it is the way the law pushes us to solve these problems.
The alternative would be for them to tear down the structure
Yeah.
and start from scratch and having an ugly McMansion on the site. And the loss of this structure, which may or may not be appealing to you, but which is not atypical of the scattered homes that were on the lots in the past. You know, there's no perfect solution here, but I think the device of the tunnel, which allows it to be deemed a single structure, the removal of the kitchen so it is in fact a single dwelling, is a pretty innovative way of saving these historic structures, notwithstanding that you may not like the proximity of the new structure to it. One solution, as I said, was putting the new structure behind where it's not seen. Another one is by architecturally styling it, either to be radically distinct, so it's clear that it's not the same, or to make it as similar as possible, so it just sort of blends in. This solution of separating them, yes, it doesn't keep the feeling that you were talking about of it being a single homestead with outbuildings, but it may appear to be two separate lots, but it effectively allows a modern usage of the property that's not excessively bulky. The actual size of it is not inconsistent with the properties in the village.
I think it's it's an acceptable compromise, and I think it's important to preserve that historic house. And you gotta remember, it's across the street from other historic houses, so it's a historic community, and that's an important goal. You know, whether it's this committee's goal or the architectural review board's goal, it doesn't really matter, it's the village's goal.
To the inconsistency that you had brought up earlier, Richie, like the house that's the addition, if we wanna call it, there's a house that's like, just like it, right up the road.
Yeah.
Like that's a
Little
design,
further
like,
to
and there's
the-
one down the road too.
Yeah.
The only thing that's unique is really the Hedges house on one side of the road, this on the other side of the road, the little clustering of buildings, but they've largely been built up around houses like that, so. If the goal is again to preserve the the farmstead look to the initial structure. This is the best possible compromise. I don't doubt that, but I think the tunnel's crazy.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot.
Just
Yeah,
want to add
please.
one thing too, when it comes to adding to the existing Greek revival in the front. As they mentioned, the front yard setback, these houses, when they were originally built, were closer to the street.
road.
So what happened was, because I originally had multiple concepts, And originally my client was like, I wanna do a sweeping shingle style home. He owned a house on Daniels Lane several years ago, 15 years ago that he sold. He liked the shingle style home. I've done several of those throughout the Hamptons area. And I just explained to him when it comes to the story of this property and how it works. There, you know, from day one, it was always, there's a little Greek revival house that was always there. And then there's these barn structures beyond in the distance, right? When we went to the ARB, if we were to make this structure a big sweeping shingle English style home, everyone would be like, that's a complete monkey wrench and what's going on? And granted, they look beautiful, but now it's like, we have a modern barn structure that was in the background, a Greek revival and a sweeping shingle style house. I wouldn't even I wouldn't be here presenting, I probably wouldn't take it on the job. So the concept after that, at that point was, we have this structure, and I think as the ARB, we worked back and forth with the ARB over several months. It was, just like you mentioned, we have historical structures towards the west on the north side of Hedges. This, Pat, if you don't mind going to like the aerial view, it does seem like the Greek revival with its little farmhouse off in the, you know, a little barn off in the back. And we have this addition, which would give the illusion, it is landscaped, we had landscape details involved. They were going through landscaping to kind of make it a little more subtle, push it back to, as Wayne mentioned, 113 feet, so it breaks down the scale. We're hiding the tennis courts, we're hiding all these modern day amenities from the street. I thought it was a good, I think the solution started working out for me. And I preferred originally the design that I currently showed you where it was behind. And even then, because it was a straight shot for the addition, whether we did a tunnel or a connecting piece, it was like, okay, now that feels like one big massive structure. So for me, I could have went either way. And then as we started evolving with the ARB and everything, it just started coming together for me. I felt like this makes sense. I do agree that tunnel is a little long, but that's something my client was like, okay, if this is how it's gotta be because of the ARB, this is the direction we're going, so.
And by the way, mentioning the tunnel about that requiring a variance. It's because the pre-existing non-conforming structure encroaches on the front yard and you're not supposed to increase them. And technically, even if the increase in the structure does not increase the encroachment in the front yard, it requires variance. But this obviously is not in any way affecting frontage at all. So
We're directly in line with the current structure, so they're gonna demo the existing foundation and our new tunnel, which is gonna be seen, is within that footprint.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how valuable it is, but it's.
yeah, you're not increasing the degree of non-conformity of that particular setback, even though it's increasing the non-conformity of the structure itself. All right, you mentioned the parking, so I guess just to address that. The parking is gonna be modified in the existing location. You have compliant. Yeah,
There's
right,
two stalls.
that's right. The parking on the other side that goes into the garage.
Parking back here, there's gonna be parking within the setbacks, and then there's, I think, parking here that's within the.
That's out of the
Beyond
setback.
the setback, yeah.
Where's the parking that's in the, by the Greek revival, it's to
To the
the
west.
west of it?
To the left.
So it's not in front of it, it's to the side.
But it's in the front yard, technically,
Yeah, yeah.
because of the no
Oh,
setback.
I see.
But the front yard setback is somewhere over here.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And the issue that we addressed not too long ago about there being two driveways on the single lot, they serve different locations and they're not connected to each other.
And that was something, if you look at the original design, like I said, there's things about the original that I like. We had an entrance here and it kind of connected through.
Yeah.
That was a technical thing that I dealt with John and we were gonna disconnect it. And this just kind of made sense. I think the ARB liked that it was completely separated. So it's like, you're looking from here, you see this Greek revival, the barn in the background, and then you see the main house off to the side.
Okay, anybody else? Anything else? I will move to close the hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Want to take any of this back?
Just my design.
One of
This is,
the,
this next,
I think
This
this
is
is
mine
one.
here and this is the original. You can have the other one.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We're gonna move on to the next Next application is application number 3 of 2025. It's an application of 4L Partners LLC pertaining to 780 Daniels Lane. Here for the applicant is
I asked Barry Block, design contracting, design building permit, and then the architects. We're seeking a variance for a 8-foot mesh garden fence around a new vegetable garden within the front yard side of it. So we have a package that we created to show you what we're doing and the views to the area where the garden is.
Yeah, they have a date. Okay. All right, so this better be good, because this is my street.
Oh, is it? So, the client's very, very nice. I've been working on our own, for, this is my 28th season. I'm really love what I do, and they're one of the nicest folks. And they have a big family, lots of grandchildren, and they really are looking forward to their new vegetable garden, which I'm being told, we were allowed to do, we're doing raised planters. It's really the fence that's going around. I just wanna, does everybody have the sample of the fencing? So it's black, it's rigid, but it's very transparent. My experience with fencing, which we do a ton of it, deer fencing, pool coat fencing, wood fencing, is we really don't see the fence, we see the post. That's what kind of stands out, and they're also gonna be black. And I'm proposing approximately 10 foot on center. If we need to, we could probably stretch the post to be 12 foot on center, maybe to reduce a post or two to make it less visible. But I truly feel it's very limited in what we're gonna see in terms of the fence from the views from the street. I'll get into that. So this sheet is the photo sheet. And it's also up there on the survey in the sense of where the garden's gonna be. It's on the south side of the house. So the larger photo is an aerial view, and then the other 4 photos show those views 1 through 4. So if you're driving east or westbound on Daniels Lane, there's an existing hedge that blocks the view. The hedge does step down for sight clearing distance.
So there's a proposed garden, that's on the west side of the house.
Oh,
not
pardon
the
me.
south side.
Yes, the west.
Excuse me, thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah, that's correct.
I couldn't see anything on the south side.
Yeah, thank you. Error there. So, the tall hedge parallel to the house, it does reduce for the site clearing distance. So there's really, and then as you come down Erica's Lane, that also has a tall privet hedge. So it's this radial moment where you could potentially see into the space. And that's why we have photo 1 and photo 2. Photo 1's from the Erica's Lane. Photo 2 is from Daniels Lane. And then 3 and 4 is close up inside the space. We already have an existing garden there. It's a much smaller garden, it's on the ground. We're gonna do raised planters, so it's easier for the children and the adults. But it really doesn't expand behind greater than the width of the side of the house. We have a landscape plan, we'd like to go with that too. You can kind of get a sense of where the garden's situated on the board. One of the things we want to do to help just all around with pollinators and reduce any views is there's a garden bed in front of the fence that we're going to use native plants to bring in bees and pollinators. So there's a cross section from the top. You scroll down, kind of gives you an idea if you're looking at this face of the fence. The plantings I estimate to be somewhere at least up to 4 feet. Could change them, try to make them a little tall. I just don't want to screen out or shade too much of the garden. Additionally, to the south, there's an existing hornbeam hedge which we're going to extend. So that is not only screened by the privet hedge from the street, it has an additional screen right up against the fence. So now we're only looking at the one view, the one side of the fence that's exposed. And the back, if you will, that comes up against the generator, which has a hedge existing, we're gonna clean that up, make it nicer, that's also sort of hidden. So the one moment that you see this, if you're a pedestrian or a driver, is that where the hedge steps down and there's a pocket view. And I have another way to try to reduce that too. There is an existing magnolia tree. It's not shown on this plan. You could see it in plan view maybe, just below in the visual plan view. There's an existing magnolia here that also blocks that angular view, and we could relocate that or add another tree to help reduce if there was a way to have the variance be acceptable, another tree or two to help reduce some of that views from what I believe is that one west side that has the pollinated garden in front of it, about 4 feet, that may be in view. And there is another phase of this project that's not part of the variance, where we're recreating the front, we're adding a much bigger meadow garden to the front of the house, because we got 1 floor. So this is part of that, ideally for circulation and use of the property. John brought up that we can probably do this elsewhere, but he's used to having the garden there. The access and how we want to use the other part of the property is setting it differently for play for all his grandchildren. The play equipment is on the east side of the house with a great open lawn. So that's why we don't want to relocate it where it could be legal. And hopefully, you know, through this discussion and seeing the sample and truly how limited the view is of the fence from house, it's just around the garden. It's not the whole property. It's strictly around the garden space. And it's hopefully acceptable.
And it's 55 feet back from the property line.
Right, that's correct. Yeah, you can see it on the survey.
Have we ever had an application, I know we had an application for a geofence where somebody wanted to preclude, they were talking about fencing their entire residential property. Have we ever had an application where they're talking about protecting a small vegetable
That's a
garden
good
from
question.
deer?
I think it is definitely a distinction between a fence along a property line as opposed to one that's this 55 feet within the property, screened by a hedge.
But you said, John said something about it could be legal somewhere, but
No,
I,
not legal.
you didn't say, okay, that was, I misunderstood
Right.
what you said. It couldn't be
In
legal
our-
anywhere because of its height.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It's just in discussion about, John and I came to see John a couple of times talking about part 1 of this project, which again we have permits for, is how to approach the board and what would be legal.
What's the fencing around the existing garden there?
It is a much more, it's black, it's the same hex, but it's almost like bird netting. It doesn't have the rigidity.
You can see it gets pulled down by
Yeah, it's
anything growing
sagging
on it,
and
yeah.
it's not
It
working.
looks kind of bad.
Yeah, it does. It's actually an eyesore because when you go near the garden, the climbing tomatoes, the cucumber vine.
They're pulling it
this is-
down.
Yeah.
He's like, I need some help. So,
What is the percentage of the variance you're asking for?
we're,
Side yard?
No, it's just the height.
it's just the height.
fence.
It's just the height.
It's front yard.
Since-
Side yard.
Yeah, because it's a corner lot, you have 2 front yard
Two front
setbacks,
yards. It's
Okay.
used as a side yard, but
Right.
it's a front yard technically.
technically.
I do have an email that came in. We had a neighbor on Zoom who had to leave and she would like you to relay their observation.
Should I read this into the record?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, this is like 5 minutes ago
It was received
5
at
minutes ago.
3:54 PM
today.
today, which is just a few minutes ago. From Tarun Jawatni. They have the house immediately to the north of this site.
29 Ericus.
Yeah, we're neighbors at 29 Ericus Lane. I'm sorry we have to run, but here are some simple observations. The vegetable garden is being doubled in size and they're asking for an 8-foot fence plus a cable above the fence, plus a mesh on top. It'll take up a big piece of the garden, which will all be very visible, as I explained below. They say existing privet hedge 8 foot along Ericus Lane will hide view of fence. This last point is simply not true. As it is a corner property, by law, you have to have a low privet hedge for car visibility. And there from the corner of Daniels Lane and some way into the entry of Ericus Lane, this fence will be clearly visible as it is currently and not very pleasant to look at. We certainly do not want to come in the way of them doing what they'd like to do on their property, but a good compromise would be a 6-foot fence with a cable above the fence. this, in our experience, is more than enough to deter the deer. They also talk about 3 to 4 foot native pollinator garden will cover the mesh fence, but the fence at 8 feet tall will always be visible. Let's keep it at 6 feet, please. Thank you, Karuja. What? Okay, that's an email just received. Sorry they couldn't be here. You addressed some of this in part already in your comments about the nature of the fence, but you didn't address, and maybe you should, the need for the 8 feet as opposed to 6 feet.
Right, so we're nursery too, I have a 20-acre nursery in Maryville. Deer can jump over 6 feet. Right,
Well, they
Yeah,
may be able to, but would they jump into such a small enclosure up against the house? That's not like.
so.
Yep.
It is?
Yes,
Well,
but
Even
yeah,
that small? They
especially if
wouldn't
it
be
looks
able-
good over there, they might walk by. But I mean, chances are what they're going to do if you put up a 6 foot fence, not necessarily, they're going to jump over it and they're going to slowly beat down and damage the fence. I see it in
Because they
all my
can't get out.
neighboring. I think that I completely believe, so I think the problem is that we don't allow 8 foot fencing
Right.
for aesthetic reasons, which is what the neighbors are bringing up, which
Right.
is we don't like the aesthetic, which is why our agricultural parcels, it's understood what agricultural parcels might need, so he's asking for an agricultural
Really?
addition to a residential place, and again, I'm really sympathetic with wanting to grow one's own vegetables, but I guess what I'm saying is we go ahead and do this. Every single house in Sagaponic will be, I know many small, beautiful gardens like this, they will all want this same thing. Again, I'm not saying we shouldn't allow people to grow their own food. But I just know a deer fence is an absolute requirement when you're trying to grow food. Especially if you wanna eat it.
So we give everybody that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that that's what. Again, you have some screening, which not every house in Sagaponic would have. But I do understand that vegetable gardens are more and more the norm of a large house in the Hamptons, meaning. Yes,
I mean, we're allowed 4 feet. I mean, it should be a minimum of 6 feet anyway, without getting a permit. If you wanna go 8 feet, you get a permit. That's what I always thought.
well,
But 4 feet's nothing to deter anything.
no, so they could do. With a variance, I guess you could do 6, no, yes, variance because of the
Anything over
side
4
yard.
feet. 4 feet, right? Just
Right, well,
anything
because
over
there's
4
two,
feet, it's
two
about-
side yards.
There's a difference.
In a required
front
front
yards.
yard, you're limited to 4 foot high on a wall or a fence.
And side yard
Beyond
too?
your- In your side and rear, beyond the required front yard, with a permit, you can go up to 6 feet. The only 8 foot fencing we allow is around a tennis court, or agricultural fencing.
Right, so
Right.
did you, I'm sure you've been doing a lot of this, there's a house on Bridge Lane in Sagaponic, and they built, it's a fence that's got like a candy cane. It's 4 feet,
Yeah,
you know the fence I'm
Yeah,
talking,
there.
how do they do down there?
so I'm not sure how they're making out. We had a discussion in the office, even some of the gals gave their opinions. And there's also 2 fences you can separate
Yeah.
at 4 feet. We're seeing deer jump over it. We're hearing about deer jump over it. It's an effective way maybe in the beginning, once they get used to their surroundings and they realize they can make it. I wish it was effective because I wouldn't be here taking up all of our time. And, you know, that's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't see the results being there. I know they have it by the East Hampton Airport that came up, that maybe it's being affected, but I'm hearing.
I'm sorry, what do they have at East Hampton Airport?
They have a
6?
cantilever
Instead of having
foot.
one height, they have 2 things.
It's like an L shape,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
pretty outrageous.
And again, with children running and, you know, it's just not that,
Substantially
Can you
fewer deer in
save-
the airport than they used to be.
I think what the neighbors are saying again is it's an undesirable change in the neighborhood, if that would sum up their.
if I
Right,
may.
that they take exception to the look of the fence.
So we could potentially change the materials. I selected this because I thought it was the most
Most visible.
transparent. We could do the black, what's the words, the black,
Mesh.
not the largest square, the deer fence.
Yeah.
True agricultural fence,
Yeah.
that's. what
Is
it's
that
called.
like?
6 by 6.
Yeah, that's just like that. So the
Yeah.
bigger squares, that's galvanized gold. We could do it in black.
Black.
And I could still hang it on the very narrow black poles.
Mhm.
But again, my humble experience here is I don't see this. I see the post. And here's a perfect example. It's basically transparent, but I see the post. And I could take away that top wire if that's something. I only added that for more strength. But that would be, maybe there's a compromise there. Additionally, we could
Is the
add,
top wire dented
it's
a
black.
greater diameter than this?
Yeah, it would be a 9 gauge, something to keep it taut, but I
You
would,
gotta have the wire.
you know, I'm trying to meet the
You need the wire for the support. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
slide
right.
support, it does.
And the 12-foot post is a little bit far apart, if you ask me.
Well, again, it's a way to meet common ground here for a unique.
I understand.
The other thing I was saying before is if we added more screening but further away, if I planted another tree or two for the one length that is really visible, even beyond the privet hedge, because you're not seeing it on the west side, you're not seeing it on the south side. It's-
Well, what about, you know, the neighbor to the north mentioned, the corner hedge is supposed to be at a certain height. Well, if you put a row of something else back, set back farther, that means, would that be a good thought too, or?
If I'm following what you're saying adding another tree of sorts
Yeah.
in that area where the hedge comes down, yeah,
Block the view
to the, yeah,
onto the garden,
absolutely.
so that would work, you know?
I'm sorry, is this neighbor immediately to the north?
You can see it in the photo.
It's
You can-
lot two?
If you look on, it's this house.
So I'll
Because that's Eric's
reiterate
land,
what I
so it'd be
said, that
them.
nobody was listening.
Sorry.
Where it's code to have a hedge on the corner. John can help me with it. What's the setback after that to have a higher hedge or higher?
Corner clearance laws require you to create the effectiveness of a 50-foot triangle. So you come to the corner of the lot, you have to go 50 foot back on each leg. And in that triangular area, nothing can be higher than 2 feet. If you have a tree, it must be limbed up to 10 feet.
Right. So I was suggesting that you could put within the 50-foot triangle another set of trees or vegetation, growth, grasses or whatever.
Or outside of it.
To block the area for the neighbor's problem that she has with looking at it.
Yeah. Okay.
Since you're going into the grasses in the front yard, I mean,
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
I thought a great solution.
just trying to get around with the neighbors.
Exactly.
Could
I think it's a great
complain
idea.
about.
I'm listening to this because reading the letter, it sounds like she's objecting because as you come into Erica's from Daniels, you see it. The screening that Richie's suggesting would take care of that. But they live immediately to the north of this. I'm just wondering whether they have any views of this fencing from their property.
No, this tall
Well,
evergreen.
Yeah,
tree.
that's exactly why I want to look at.
Here's the issue she's
So
having.
she's not
Here's the
objecting
issue
because
she's
of her
having
proximity.
today. Her issue today is when she drives down the road, she looks into the property, it's all hedged. How many pieces of green leaves do you see on the hedge now? There's hardly any.
Yeah.
0.1%. So now, therefore, she's looking in and sees this vegetable garden now that's a little run down looking, as Mary Lee
Well,
stated.
it's that, no, the fence.
To go and improve it would be to create a 50-foot triangle and have another type of,
Yeah.
you know, you're
Internal
talking
screening.
about redoing the front yard with vegetable, grasses or
Yeah, meadow.
other meadow things, and that could help the neighbor
Also,
out.
I find that the privet is a semi-evergreen. It holds its leaves very, very late.
Yeah.
And it's sheared and so old that it's dense with a lot of deciduous stem tissue.
Right,
And again, we're looking at a black mesh.
you can't see
You
it.
can't see it. With all respect, I feel like there's a way to get a compromise here in a positive way. Because I want to.
This person is not complaining about her view from her porch, she's complaining about driving by. So it's very.
Yeah, that was the point.
Yeah.
It's
Incident.
not because of her property's proximity to
Right,
this, it's just because it's at the.
It's the approach.
Well, we could add additional trees outside that 50-foot corner to help reduce or hide the view.
They've actually done a substantial amount of work on their property over the last year or so.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
mostly on the other side,
that's
the
great.
northeast corner of the
Mhm.
property.
Yeah,
Actually, I'm fine with the 8-foot fence around the vegetable garden. I think it's You wanna keep the deer out, you wanna grow vegetables, it's kind of a necessity.
To Merrilies
And they
point,
could be asking for an 8-foot fence around the whole property
No, I just think
to
that
keep them out of, off the whole property.
which we say
They just
no,
wanna-
which we say no to.
They just wanna block out with their,
They're
Strictly
vegetable
for the
garden.
deer.
they have 118 feet worth of fencing going up. That's 8 feet high.
And
It's-
I
They're
think,
not asking for, each side is 400, 1,200 feet of
I think to
fencing.
Merrilies point, she doesn't find this particularly objectionable, but is concerned about its precedent setting for
It
many
just reminds
other
me of the chicken
properties.
coop, that one, that's all.
Yeah. So we try to make this one-off if it's acceptable in itself. So that it doesn't become general provision within the village. Limitations either as to size or distinguishing this one because of the 55-foot setback from the property line. Immediately adjacent to the house, up against the house, not more than a certain number of feet. Would that satisfy people that this would enable them to have their garden without creating an undesirable precedent in the village?
No,
You don't think so?
no.
Okay.
I have a question. The stuff you're raising in the garden, is all of it, or is any of it perennial, or is all of it seasonal?
We haven't gotten to the planting list yet, but may I ask why I have the question? Would you rather see one or the other? Would that help the process?
No, I was just thinking that I'm totally opposed to a fence, 8-foot fence. Okay? The only possible way you could think about it was you put one in there that's temporary, only when the crop is growing. And it's only there during May to September.
It's an interesting thought. If we lower and raise the fence during the growing season? As long as it's a unique thought, I hadn't actually.
It's a very good idea, because the deer, my experience is the deer go into the woods in summer anyway.
Yeah.
And they're much less likely to.
They don't go to the woods, they go into the corn.
Yeah, okay.
They are there heavily though. There's a heavy
the
population.
deer, so again, it depends how much these people wanna put into their vegetable garden. Of course, taking down the fences is an option, and then putting them up in the spring is the next option. I think the thing I think most is that most people are, at some time or another, all these homes are eventually going to wanna add a vegetable garden. And I would be very upset to know that I couldn't raise my own vegetables. If it takes a fence to do so. I mean, one other thing to do is to actually live in the house, right? If you're living in the house, like the deer, but again,
I've been
like,
there throughout the.
right, and so
everything.
that's,
It's deer.
it's just like sort of the absence. It's a problem, we've never seen one of these applications before.
I like how you were
You did,
describing
and it was denied.
No, that was the entire property for
No, it was
medical
not.
reasons.
You can see it from Daniel's Lane, it was an 8-foot mahogany fence with stainless steel wire to protect these really
Is
weird
it still
European
there?
string beans. No, it's been cut down to 6 feet.
Okay, you still see it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just as visible as when it was 8 feet.
Yep.
So I guess that's, again, I'm having problems with all of our rules.
That sounds like a very intense fence, what you described.
This is
Well,
and
it's
this
really
is
nice
a,
looking.
but no,
Right.
but well, it matches the house,
Uh,
whereas what you're trying to design is an invisible fence.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And between some screening we talked about, taking the top wire out potentially, adding maybe some taller screening pollinator plants. It's not much in view other than this little pocket where the privet goes down to 2 feet that we can hide.
And again, the concern here is it's gonna create an undesirable change in the neighborhood.
well, I don't think that, the neighbor thinks that, yeah.
You were saying about the amount of linear footage, if it was documented that way. You were saying about proximity to the house, documented that way. Maybe there's some other things greater we could think about that
Things
form
that
this
wear
very-
off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's, I,
So it's not reproducible automatically, but people making similar applications can refer to those conditions which make it acceptable as opposed to unacceptable.
yeah,
We have some degree of discretion here, right? We're not bound technically by precedent. So we can make decisions as long as we have some reasonable basis for distinguishing them. To prevent something from becoming generalized that you would find
Yeah,
unpalatable.
but it's very hard to do because we could create all kinds of, this is this house or that house or this kind of.
We're not gonna spot zone house by house, but we'll have some general standards.
But if we grant this at 8 feet or whatever, you're gonna have a hard time explaining why you're not giving it to other vegetable gardens.
So
I mean, this one is not particular, this house is not more attractive to deer than some other house.
No, but for example, if this garden were to have been moved to the east side of the house in the big open lawn, then you would have this fence structure sitting out there in the middle of the lawn, which would be a lot more offensive
Then
No
having
pun
it screen, right.
than being
More view,
up against the house.
hidden by the hornbeam,
Yeah.
hidden by the backside.
Yeah.
Again, I wanna repeat, it's to us, I hope you agree, it's just the one face that faces west, where it shows we have the pollinated garden that's mostly in view, which we have an idea about how to screen that 50 foot outside of that corner with some flowering trees to knock that view down. I'm even thinking now, if there was a way, if I could lower the sides where the hornbeam hedge is, maybe I put that section down to 7 foot or 6 foot, because we have that hedge of trees.
Right, so something I have noticed is where people have a well-maintained pool fence and the privet hedge has grown up through that,
Mm.
you're not really getting through that because the way the privet is, it might as well be a 40-foot fence because you have that
Yeah,
6 or
that thick
4
bit,
foot
that's-
section in the bottom
Mhm.
where it's completely, the fence has been so absorbed by the trees that it's pretty impassable even at a low fence. And that's what I would recommend, should you not get the variance, is to plant a privet with, although the shading is an issue, but you could always keep your privet to 8 feet and your 4 or 6 fence in that.
Right, yeah, it's a little.
It's not perfect.
Well,
It would work,
it's not gonna, well, would it get enough sun into the?
Yeah, that's why.
That, then he's blocking all the sun.
But in the plan, did you see the bottom where you see the green band there, that's where we're extending the hornbeam hedge. What if we took an approach where we lowered that one section? Again, adding to this list of uniqueness to the specific variance request, maybe we lower that section to a 6 foot. And so now we're not asking for 8 foot around the whole side, we're only asking around 2 sides. Realizing the fence is attaching to the house, part of the fence is, it's, the house is part of the enclosure.
But but just to be clear, the neighbor's complaint is with respect to the fence on the
Southwest
west
corner.
side.
Understood. So we have this solution here where we could add some trees to screen that view when the hedge goes down in height for the site clearing distance. This is resolvable. It's a very short linear footage. It's 38 feet along that
it's
west side.
118 feet.
Yeah.
Well, you're saying it's attached to the house?
Well, we have another
way.
post there,
Yeah.
but and then the fence.
It ends at
But the
the house.
house is the eastern enclosure.
So it's actually less than that. It's only.
Right, it's 38 foot long by 21 deep. And the solution is to reduce the 21 feet along the hornbeam
It's only
hedge.
80 feet long.
It's very short.
Well,
I'm sorry, the 38 is from
It's,
here to here, right?
That's correct.
okay, let's cut to the chase. We've heard a number of suggestions. I won't close the hearing because there's gonna be some more discussion about this, but we could do it now. Or we could resume the hearing next month. I'd like to get them a decision. There have been a couple of suggestions that might mitigate the effect. One would mitigate the visual effect aesthetically by the trees in that southwest corner that would visually screen it. The second one was by, and the technical one, by lowering the fence on the south side to 6 feet where the hornbeam is. And if a variance is granted, by at least articulating within that grant of the variance, the particular circumstances of this one which justify granting the variance because it's partially enclosed by the house itself. It's 55 feet back from the property line. It's small in size, which would give you the ability to exercise some degree of discretion and judgment over future applications. So do we want to make those recommendations or those requirements of granting a variance?
If,
So now getting back to what it says on here, it says area variance for front yard setback. So is front yard setback on the south and the west is what this is entailing, because it's a corner lot,
It would
John?
just be the west, and basically, I wasn't sure
Basically-
how to write it up exactly, because you are not allowed to have fencing in your front yard greater than 4 feet. So technically, if you're going to allow fencing greater than 4 feet in your front yard, it would be a front yard setback relief.
Because
so
it's
the
a
other
corner lot.
factor would be.
I have to make it fit somewhere.
No, okay, but it's the height of the fence
I just
that
wanted to
creates
clarify
the
that.
setback.
I
Right.
just wanted to clarify what they were asking.
Yeah, and it's on the westerly side of the property. Oh, it's actually the south side is also within the front yard.
I
The
think-
whole
I
front
think
yard
we
is
should
here.
change- I think we should just change village code to allow 8-foot fences around vegetable gardens under a certain size.
Well, that may be a recommendation.
That might be what we do next, so we
village
can
board,
avoid
but it's
having a
not-
million zoning board hearings after this one.
Okay, but what I'm hearing then, Marilee, is that you're not opposed to an 8-foot fence. You're opposed to the issue that it creates with respect to the code interpretation and potential abuse of the code.
I'm not opposed to an 8-foot fence around around a large agricultural field or around a modest personal use of a garden. I would be opposed to an 8-foot fence surrounding an entire property for merely whatever reason.
I don't think that's
But
before
what
us,
is the
and I don't think
difference?
that our grant.
What is it? Could you clarify the difference?
The difference would be the scale of things and what it's actually excluding. So all they're doing here is prohibiting deer on a very small portion, small and important
Yeah, but
portion of
getting
their
back-
property.
Getting back
If they
to-
fence the entire property, they're excluding not just deer, but other things from moving through and across their property, which unfortunately, the deer and us both have some claim to this
Well,
territory.
the deer can move across this property.
It's also-
Right, and that's what I'm saying, we're not precluding making the neighbor's problem worse with deer because
Right.
we just allowed this guy to
Right.
take all of it, so it's not making your problem somebody else's problem. That's why I'm ultimately opposed by deer fencing around residential properties.
And aesthetically, it also breaks up the open space of the village, because if there's a fence, there's probably gonna be some screening with hedges
No, we
against
have
the
that.
fence, which is gonna be blocking views. I'm a big advocate of view shed within the village, so I don't wanna see
Yeah.
screened in properties, whether with inorganic or organic screening.
What's the total area of the garden?
Total area, it's 21 by 38, so I don't have the calculation quick in my head, but 20 by 40. It's not, average.
Okay.
It's a swimming pool. Size.
It's pretty small. The other thing too, just to kind of put out there.
698
is
square
We're very
feet.
close to agricultural, which we see deer fencing. We have one right here. We see this fencing, very similar. If it appeased the board and the neighbor, again, we could change it.
Oh, no, people hate those.
Oh, they hate that. I'm
Yeah,
just
it
trying-
doesn't matter, it's the 8-foot thing.
Okay, this is
It's
the
just
better
that the
solution.
use,
Okay.
it's the use is different of that land, like the understood use, your residential, that understood use is agricultural and
Okay.
that's the value of the land.
Gotcha.
Whereas the value of your land is residential, or not your land.
People
but
are more
half.
forgiving if they think it's keeping them alive.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I'd like to get to a conclusion of this
yeah.
application.
And to your point too, we're not forcing the deer off the
Yeah,
property.
no, I
They have Full
understand.
range to graze the entire lawn.
Yeah.
Okay, can we agree on either recommendations or conditions or a decision one way or the other? I mean, rather than an endless discussion going around circles.
I would, I'm okay with this, as long as maximum efforts are taken to screen it. You suggested, the most visible part of this is from the southwest. Put some more trees in the southwest and.
Sure. And just to your point, if you look to this, an aerial view, this little arrow of 3,
Yeah.
that's a dark
like sort of true screen.
Yeah.
That's the satellite picking up, there's another tree there, that's that magnolia.
Yeah.
It's also knocking some views, but yes, to your point, sir,
Right.
we could add more trees.
So I think it's helpful that we've conditioned this on requiring some steps be taken, additional steps, and I'm fine with it.
Great.
I think one of the things that I think is important about it, again, referring to the one that we do have on. That's visible from Hedges, it's off of, what is that, close?
Physical containers.
Yeah, what is Springfield, what is the name of that, close?
Heritage.
No, where you're talking about, where that, you know where,
Street?
Mansfield Close, that's where that, right,
Mansfield.
Mansfield, okay, so that's where, so that's a mahogany fence with white trim, remains very visible. I think something I'd be interested seeing if we approve this variance is the, similar to these deer fences, is that they're unobtrusive to the eye, whatever that.
Okay, so we need to hammer out all of the details at this time. But I'd like to get the sense of the board, you're opposed to any fence.
Goes to an 8-foot fence, it's not agricultural.
Okay. Richie, you are not, so
I'm fine with the fence,
And-
on the closure on this piece of property that's 698 square feet. And if they would be okay with putting some flowering trees or other to block some view a little bit, or like Marilee says, maybe plant a hedge around that thing 60 feet off, let that grow 12 feet high. I'm good with that too.
Marilyn, you're also inclined to allow this variance with conditions. I am so inclined.
I said the same thing.
Okay, so that being the case, rather than keeping everybody here while we endlessly discuss what those conditions would be, we will close the hearing unless you want to have a comment period, not further testimony, but where you could submit to the board some comments in writing about what kinds of conditions are feasible and desirable, or that you'd be willing to accept.
Well, that this landowner would just say.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, right, okay?
I guess my only other concern is that there's one neighbor who's not happy about this, so if we close the hearing. I realize it was noticed, all that, that's my concern. Is that people maybe haven't been heard who feel passionate about this.
Well,
We're
Tough,
trying- we're- the
tough,
one
should have been here.
no,
Yeah.
she can submit written comments too. We'll
Yeah,
tell her, we'll
okay.
close the hearing. There's
But
no
we're
further
going to,
testimony.
We haven't ignored it.
But we
Yeah.
will accept comments.
Mhm.
Now, we wanna say for 10 days from now or until 10 days before next meeting. I mean, it's gotta be some limitation and some opportunity for us to consider the materials that we get in time to render a decision at the next meeting.
But just like 14 days.
Okay, so why don't we say 2 weeks?
The information has to be in how much before the next meeting? Pat,
It has to be what?
information for the next meeting has to be in by what date?
Well, that's
if
up
it's
to
a
you,
new
you have to
application.
choose that.
If it's a new
If
application,
you're
it's
talking about the deadline, it's usually a month before, the deadline for next month's meeting will already pass, the 12th.
But this is an open,
but
this is an application.
This is submitting additional
Yeah.
materials, and, you know, we're not bound to render the decision by the next meeting, we have 62 days, but when you do the plantings and all, what's your planting schedule if you're gonna do this for this season?
Well, honestly, not knowing if we're gonna get approved, everything's sort of on hold, but it could happen this summer or in the fall. Because if it goes late with approval, the client's like, I don't wanna upset his summer, we'll wait till he's
But
not even in the
if
house.
you were to be planting for this summer's use, when would you have to undertake that planting?
This spring,
Well, when's that?
oh, specifically?
April 15th?
Yeah, if we got the approvals and we started April, May, sure.
Okay, all right, so
So we should decide at the next meeting.
we should decide at the next meeting, so one way or the other, so that they know what they're doing, right? And in order to give you the opportunity to provide more information about how maybe to shape a variance,
Okay.
we'll provide a period of time for you to submit, and you can please let these people know that we have taken their written comments into consideration. And that if they would like to supplement their submission, they may do so by, and now we just need to decide that date. So, you wanna say by, April first?
The meeting's April 11th.
Yeah, so that would give us 10, 11 days, or we could just make it 14 days from now, it's almost the same thing, it's
Yeah.
March 28th.
So 20.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
what day of the week is that? We'll make it a Friday.
Twenty-eight.
Okay, by Friday, March 28th. So I will entertain a resolution to close the hearing at this meeting, but with the opportunity for both applicant and anyone in opposition to the application to submit comments and suggestions no later than March 28th.
So what I'm gonna prepare for you is a synopsis of what we talked about today and show it on plan.
Like those ideas of how you'd increase the screening.
Right, how I'm gonna increase the screening, I'm gonna call out the square footage, I'm gonna suggest us bringing the hornbeam hedge side down to 6 feet. Think about the pollinator plants, how tall they'll be, maybe I'll express that, try to reach for the largest, tallest pollinator plants. And
We don't wanna unduly restrict what you put in the garden.
Yeah.
but so as I present that to you, will the person in opposition, are we gonna show that? Am I coming back to explain this again?
Not gonna be further testimony, it's just gonna be a submission of conditions that you would accept as conditions of granting the variance that would mitigate some of the adverse effects that were mentioned.
And then as far as the top wire, if we,
It's almost invisible anyway, isn't it?
Black.
Yeah, they might be capturing that from the other deer fence debate, because there was, in the original ag fences, it would come 8, and then they put this like individual wire, which would have
Yeah, this one
been
does-
at the very top of the
Right.
post, and that was 8.6. So they might be thinking that's what you're
Right.
talking about, rather than the stabilizing wire,
Mhm.
which would just seem,
We'll call it a stabilizing wire
yeah,
at
it's
the top
not,
of
it's
the
not a
fence.
segregated additional 6
Right.
inches.
Chris, are you getting this?
He's
I
asleep.
got everything. I've written everything down as far as the conditions. I think it's definitely workable too, as far as, I know there's a fear of the precedent it would set, but I do think you could absolutely make this so you don't have that issue coming up, especially given the distance, the setback distance. The garden is from the street as well as the size of the garden. I mean, those are clear.
Yeah, and the adjacency to the house.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I think we're in pretty good
All right,
shape.
thank you for your
Get
consideration.
your comments and we'll do the best we can to craft something.
All right, everybody, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so this took a little longer than I expected. I thought we were gonna get these things done more quickly. So we had a hearing at the February meeting, which also seemed initially to be a relatively minor application, but it stirred up more concern than I had anticipated. We reserved decision. We closed the hearing, but we reserved decision. And I want limited discussion, not a lengthy discussion today of whether we're granting the variance or not, and if so, whether there are any conditions. Now, I will state my own view first. Privilege of being the
Make
chairman.
sure,
I'll try to.
under your own
Okay,
word.
as you know, the requirements for a variance require us to review various standards, among which are any adverse effect on the neighborhood. I don't believe that this application invokes any adverse effect on the neighborhood. Adverse effect on the environment. I don't believe this application creates any adverse effect on the environment. Substantiality, that is how much of a variance is required. I think both in terms of the encroachment on the rear yard setback and in terms of the rear yard coverage. I don't think that it is a substantial variance that's being requested in terms of size. As to a feasible alternative, that's a little more ambiguous. There is perhaps a feasible alternative, which would be to reduce the size of the coping, or reduce that on the south end of the tennis court, to reduce the encroachment in the rear yard setback and the rear yard coverage. The alleged reason that that's not feasible is the expense. It's approximately $32,000 to do that. That is not an insignificant sum of money, but in the context of the development of the property and $165,000 for the tennis court to begin with, in my mind, it doesn't render it infeasible. So the feasibility of an alternative, in my mind, is there is some feasible alternative available. And the last factor is the self-created hardship, which is not determinative of whether a variance is granted or not, but is one of the factors to consider. In my mind, a self-created hardship, I differentiate between whether it's an intentional self-created hardship or an inadvertent accidental one. There is some speculation as to how this all came about. It's allegedly a builder's error who in good faith positioned the tennis court at the same place that the old one was with the same posts, the net posts. But there's nothing in the record, as I read it, that is significant evidence that there was any intention to violate the setback requirement and seek forgiveness as opposed to permission. Even if there were, the other factors that we've considered, which is the environment, the neighborhood, the substantiality, and are mitigate towards granting the variance, and the feasibility is kind of cut either way, but I don't believe that the self-created hardship, which is the one that seemed to trouble the board the most, overcomes the other factors and would result in a denial of the variance. Notwithstanding that, because of the concern, and again, as you heard, this concern in the last application about granting a variance but encouraging people to not take our code seriously in other instances, I think it's important, and I think we had somewhat of an agreement on that, that there should be something in the granting of the variance, if it is there, that will make it clear that sloppiness or carelessness is not going to excuse our review of people's conduct in complying with the code, or meaning that variances will be easy to come by. So we have a proposed decision. I'm not saying that that should be granted. I want to hear from the rest of you, but I've summarized my position, which is that I would grant the variance with an admonition in the language of the variance that we take seriously the desire that people comply with code and not take it for granted that variances will be given because of either ill intent or even inadvertent error. Comments?
I just see that, I think it was $33,000 to move it.
Yeah.
1.64 inches. I'd do it for that.
So you would.
I think it's overinflated, the price of what they're saying it's worth to move that.
Yeah, we were probably remiss.
Whereas I kind of agree with what the granting of the variance says. I mean, builder's error, they could have got the builder to change it. I mean, on their dime, you know? So.
We perhaps should have honed in more on the expense and having it substantiated, but we didn't.
I think that's hard to do too. I mean, well, maybe not for you, but I mean, I just see the extent that people go to make these properties a certain way, and it's the most expensive kind of building you can do. It's like the fossils need to line up in the coping, like it's, I mean, we sort of jaw drops on the $30,000 price tag, but by the time it's over.
Well, you know, it's like, here somebody goes and builds a house and says, oh, you know what, we need an extra 20 feet on the sideline, we'll just go get a variance, you know?
But that's
But we
20
want this
feet.
Huge house,
Yeah.
you know, or here you have a tennis court, they want 1.4 feet.
Mhm.
It's still a lot, it's still asking for something, so it's just. Let's weigh the apple, it's basically the same thing, you know what I mean?
It's not in proximity to any other house. It's at ground level. It's not obstructing anybody's views. It's not bringing the noise of a tennis court closer to anyone. I mean, I think there. Yeah, so what I'm saying is I don't like the self-created hardship aspect of it and a builder's carelessness. And I agree that if the builder was careless and did it, then the builder should pay for rectifying it. Nonetheless, in light of the insubstantial damage or encroachment on the other standards that we apply to granting a variance, I don't think that the self-created hardship overcomes
Yeah,
the
so
lack of
it just comes down to the homeowner builder, says, let's try to get a variance, and if they get the variance, they're fine, if they don't get the variance, we gotta change it, you know?
Right, right.
So it's one or the other, so it's like,
And so.
I
really
think
the-
it's minimal, but
So
I just wanna get the point like
you're
Mary
doing,
Lee
you're
said.
doing the appropriate weighing,
Yeah,
which is what we're talking
I'm
about.
weighing it, but
But which
still,
way do you come out at the end of the day, given that point of view? In favor of or opposed to the variance?
well, I'm kinda up and down about it, but you know, I think what the guy says is $33,000, I think that was not true. I mean, anybody could get a price for moving 60 feet of coping, you know, for $33,000.
We didn't challenge it on the record.
Yeah,
We
so
we definitely
We
talked.
talked
you talked about it
We
a lot,
talked about it
'cause
because he-
that was on the Zoom
We
meeting.
talked
Same
about it,
thing.
but we didn't ask for or get
An
competing
actual quote,
bids or
yeah,
quotes.
yeah.
So
But
so
he
it
went
was
to-
questioned, but
But
it
does it
wasn't-
really matter? I mean, it's only if.
But you know, it's what I was saying before, it comes down to the vote of the board, he's either you're gonna give it or you're not, you know, it's what the people on the board have to decide, and
That's why I'm asking you. So we're having the discussion.
I'm for it. I said,
Okay,
I think
I
they should
summarized
grant
the
the
weighing
variance.
of the issues both ways.
And put it in all the language where, you
And,
know,
yeah,
self-created hardship and da, da, da,
all
da.
right, so
Chris can do that.
with the weighing of the factors that we just discussed, knowing that there is some discomfort about the way this came about, you're still in favor of granting the variance with those admonitions, shall we call it, in the decision?
Yeah.
Okay, Marilyn, yes or no?
I have, you just want to say yes or no?
No, I want you to say what
I will
you.
say
Of
yes or
course,
no.
you're
But at the
So-
end, at the end of your comments, I'm
It's
looking for
a
a
yes, it's a
or
yes
no.
or a no, so I think again, same problem there, I don't actually, I understand it is at the end of the day, but the impact of this is. The only impact is the inconvenience to the owner and the builder at this point. If we disrupt this, but I think when I see an overstep, intentional or no, as I stated to you before, in order for people's behavior to change, they have to know that there's some level of damage or punishment done in order for them to remember, that's not how you put a tennis court in Sagaponic.
It got beat
So,
up last
so,
month and
right, so
it's
I'm
sitting
always
there.
looking, I think I'm always looking for some offset, like that answers this, like some give back. We're allowing you this mistake, how will you learn from this mistake? But ultimately, what I agree with is that the reason I'm willing to tolerate this mistake is it's kind of nothing. The other tennis court is even closer to tennis court. That property has already been massively disturbed. There's nothing else happening there.
And there are many tennis courts in the area that have lesser setback than this.
True.
So I'm
Said yes.
I'm amenable to approving this
Oh, yeah,
variance.
you didn't answer, yes or no.
Yeah, I thought you said yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, I would,
Yeah.
I wouldn't,
Yes.
I felt differently until we kept thinking about it, honestly, or I.
Well, that's what the purpose of the meeting is, and the discussion. Discussion on the record, it's public meeting, yeah.
So I'm amenable to granting this variance, but notwithstanding that, people have talked about discomfort, I'm actually offended by what was done. I think that whether it was, to me, it doesn't really matter whether it was intentional and they decided to let's just do it and see what happens, or it was just stupid. that really doesn't matter to me. I think what we need to communicate is you've got to pay attention to these rules, and we don't care what happens if you don't. I mean, we don't care why you don't, we're going to sanction you in some way. To me, the $33,000 is relatively insignificant. I'm not moved by that. It's 20%. It's probably not the real number, and even at that number, it's only 20% more of the total cost, or more than.
And a fraction of the
Yeah,
development.
so
property.
for a wealthy Sagaponic person, I think that's relatively insignificant. But I definitely want to send the message that we paid a lot of attention to this, and we care, we're sensitive to this misconduct.
So
Can I
you're,
say one more thing, just
yeah,
based on
sure.
this? Because I think also what would matter in what you're saying, because everyone makes errors, right? Is what is the overall impact of this error, right? If this was a really big house that, like you said, had done an extra 20 feet or even 5 feet, it would be very significant, but this is kind of.
De minimis.
Yeah, that's why I'm willing to
Yeah.
go, that's why I'm willing to accept it.
Yeah, I mean.
With a note, with a note that, I think this is misconduct.
Well, let's, talking about misconduct, somebody goes and brings in a plan like past him. They want 10-15% overage already above what's allowable, And they're asking for permission before they even build,
But
that's
that's
what
what
you're
you're supposed to do, though.
We don't have.
That's what they hire the lawyers for.
Yeah.
But here's something that was maybe a mistake, or,
Right?
I don't think it really affects it that much, that, and it's not visible, it's ground level, it's not so that's why I'm kind of,
That's the point,
You know?
whether it was intentional or not, the consequences of it do not warrant the denial in this case. But if it were intentional, it certainly makes you think harder and longer about whether you will tolerate the consequence, even if it is not great. Right? Okay, but you care to comment?
Well, we've thought about this a long time. There's one other item that may or may not, I will yield to you as to whether or not it's a valid thought. And that is, if we deny it, it will probably go up on appeal, and we'll probably lose the appeal. So if we've made it clear in the writing that that's where we are, then we're probably not gonna win this thing otherwise.
Okay, interesting comment. We are required to comply with the law, and the law gives us standards for rendering a decision. Generally, the courts will defer to administrative boards like this zoning board, as long as there's a rational basis for it, it's not arbitrary, and there are some legitimate bases to deny this variance if we wanted to. In my opinion, as I said, I do not think that the adverse issues on a couple of the factors is sufficient to override the applicant's entitlement to the variance. I also doubt that the applicant would challenge this in an Article 78, which would cost substantially more than the $30,000 to just move the fence. However, I'm not rendering a decision, in my view, based upon whether we're gonna get sued or not,
Right.
but whether it's the right thing to do. And in my opinion, I think the right thing to do here, despite some discomfort about how it came about, is to grant the variance and make it clear in the granting of the variance that we're not happy about even inadvertent sloppiness that ends up violating the code and necessitating a variance. And that the main reason that it's being permitted here is because it's relatively inconsequential, even if it were intentional.
I will support that point of view.
Thank you. So we did have a decision written up. It was massaged somewhat, mostly with Henry's assistance. And Brian has produced Chris has produced a decision in form for us to vote in favor of or against, and it does include the kind of language that we've been discussing. I don't know if you've all had a chance to read it. If so, then I will ask for a motion to approve the,
To be clear, Elliot,
Yeah.
when you just said that there was, that Henry, that we saw the fine, what you sent. I didn't read this here today, so this is what we were emailed the other day, it's the same.
no, what you were emailed was revised.
Right, that's what I'm
To
saying.
toughen up the language.
Right, okay, and that's, all right, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't another
This copy's
version.
revised? From
No, this
what
one.
we
The
sent?
one you got today, I don't know what your,
There was, yeah, so Pat circulated one.
Yeah.
Maybe 4 or 5 days ago, last week, that was revised.
Right,
And I don't know if it was circulated before today.
so then, okay,
well, because.
But you can see, there's some black.
that's what I was, okay, and that's, I get it, I understand now, but I'm fine.
All right, so
No, I only got one.
Yeah, this is today. And this was also today, I wanted you to see.
This is the record of the changes and this is the completion of it.
Well, one's clean copy and one's got the
Yeah.
And to be
changes.
clear, the changes did not impose any additional conditions on the granting of the variance. They merely expressed the sentiment of the board with respect to the presentation and the need for the variance. That we labored quite a bit of time over this, not necessarily because of the impact that the facts on the ground will have in the village, but on the impact that the decision will have on respect for the code and the integrity of the code. That was the hardest part of this decision. So the decision does grant the variance and does admonish applicants, this one and future ones, to be more careful in their development so that they don't need variances that create this kind of an issue. That being said, do I hear a motion to
I'll make a
adopt?
vote. This looked better than the other one.
Yeah, right, it's improved. Okay,
I'll make a vote.
so Richie is making a motion, do I hear a second?
Decision.
Second, yes, all in favor? Aye. All right, variance has been granted unanimously, I might mention. But
Think
yeah,
they're the same.
you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say that was, I've probably done hundreds of variants, that was the harshest approval I've ever done. And I think that I'm sure.
That was the point.
And you'll let your client know that.
I will let my client know that I've also represented municipal boards and the record you just made was with your dream come true, so you operate well. I'm jealous of.
You know, I didn't give your name.
I'm Carl Benacosta, 860 Monument Highway,
Yes,
Water.
and you know something about these things.
Yes,
I know you've been around.
Yeah, well, thank you very much and have a great week.
Thank you for your
Well, I'll
patience.
send
Did
you
you get
the
it?
filed
Yes.
decision.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
I saw you looking, I said, it's interesting.
He looks different on that video.
Yes.
Yes,
Off the record, is the recording?
No, not yet.
make a
Oh,
motion to
I'll
adjourn that.
entertain a motion to adjourn the
So
meeting.
moved. Yep.
So I hear a second
Second.
meeting, all in favor? Meeting's adjourned. What did you think you were gonna get when you came in here today?
I had no idea.